Morning. The last time I gave a speech up here, it was the spring of my freshman year. I was reading a speech about courage for the Wildest Speaking Prize. This year, they bribed us with cash, but 3 years ago, I was bribed with extra credit in my English class by Mr. Hale. So, of course, me being the little go-getter I was going to get any extra points I could. Back then, the Wildest Speaking Prize was a little different. You would have to write a speech as well as memorize one about the prompt. I didn't know why I ended up picking one of the longest speeches to memorize, and Mr. Lazaire, as well as the rest of any fall cast play crew, can tell you that I am awful at memorizing things. 3 years working with him, and I've never failed to be the last actor to have her lines completely down. Anyways, I stand up and deliver the memorized speech. It was going well until about the last paragraph when all of a sudden everyone in the audience started giggling. I started feeling self-conscious and wondered if they were laughing at me. Well, while I was thinking this, I completely forgot where I was in my speech, and I stuttered for a couple seconds. I ended up restating the last 3 minutes. After I regrouped, all the while shaking, everyone had stopped giggling. I finally got through the speech, and after the competition was over, I found out that someone had farted, or at least that's what it sounded like, so people in the area laughed. Naturally. Standing up here now, I can't help but think of only how I have changed since then, but how my relationships and peers have changed as well. I was asked at a point this year, who are these senior speeches for? Well, mine personally is to the Brooks School and to all the people that make Brooks what it is. And the message is, thank you. When I first came to Brooks, I hated it. I mean, I'm not trying to make this a Brooks roast, but I loathed it here. I wasn't used to all of the rules, and I missed my family. But to fully understand how much I hated being put in a bubble, you need to know a bit about my life before Brooks. From since I could remember, it had just been my 2 sisters, Haley and Aurora, my mom, dad, and me. I was born in Rochester, New York, then moved to Limerick, Ireland, then Austin, Texas, then on to Singapore, and on to Finland. And I spent my 8th grade year on Martha's Vineyard applying to boarding schools and attending the local middle school there. We had traveled the world together. People always asked me if I hated moving so much, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I loved traveling. It had been all I'd known, a part of my identity. I've never been anywhere. I've been everywhere in Southeast Asia, and I'm well traveled in Europe. Though at the time, I did not appreciate waking up at 6 a.m. to hike a huge mountain to see a random temple on vacation, I now look back and value those experiences. I was given the opportunity to learn many lessons in extreme ways at a young age. Some were simple, like put on sunscreen when your mom tells you to. My family and I were hiking through rice paddies in the Philippines when my mom told me to re-lather on sunscreen. I got distracted by an ox or something and didn't do it. I didn't realize until nighttime, but my skin was so burnt, it started to blister. While my sisters slept soundly on our hut, that night I stood very still, with my arms propped to each side, careful not to let my skin touch anything. I now remember that pain every time I weigh my odds on putting on sunscreen or getting burnt. The other lessons I've learned were more complicated, like poverty, pain, and genocide. At the age of 7, I walked across the killing fields in Cambodia. As I walked through the vast landscape, I looked down at what looked like white, broken-up seashells crunched under my little feet. It reminded me of the seashell driveways on Martha's Vineyard, but those were bones of human beings I was walking on, not seashells. My young brain couldn't comprehend why something like this would happen, but getting exposure to these things and seeing the aftermath firsthand prepared me for the harshness of the world. It painted no fairy tales, no false pretenses of a perfect life, so I prepared myself at this young age for what life would throw at me, because I knew what it was capable of. I also learned many things from my siblings. My eldest sister, Haley, loved reading and writing. I, on the other hand, hated it. When I was younger, it would take me twice as long as everyone else to read something. Haley tenderly guided me towards books and often encouraged me to think outside the box. She was a paragon of wisdom for me growing up and helped me find my creativity. My other sister, Aurora, taught me to love competition. As we are so close in age, everything became competition. She is smaller and faster than me and is incredibly good at any sport she picks up. I, on the other hand, am a bit slower at picking up sports and just plain slower in general. In trying to keep up with her, she made me faster and stronger, and she instilled in me the qualities of the type of athlete I am today. And just to show you how bad I was at picking up sports, there's a little video of me. I was very little. Actually, it wasn't. I was probably bigger than most of the people on the field, and I was the only girl, but we were playing flag football, not tackle football.
People going like, get him.
Get him, Amy. No, Amy, go get him. Get him.
So, yeah, I got a little confused and tackled the poor kid instead of pulled his flag. While we other have home videos of my sister picking up a lacrosse stick for the first time as like a toddler and just shooting it and scoring immediately. A question that I've been asked on my journey through life is, where are you from? This is the hardest question for me to answer. I used to pause a really long time, and people would get frustrated with how hard this question was for me to answer. I now just say Burlington, Massachusetts, but because that's where my parents currently live. Though I slept on a mattress on the ground of my sister's room for the majority of my time at that house, but where was I from? Where was home? I would always want to say Singapore because that's where the bulk of my memories come from, and it's where I spent the longest time in one place. The 5 years I spent in Singapore, I was put in an international school full of expats. I never experienced culture shock when moving because I felt like I had no specific way of living. I never questioned what was around me, even why there were Gurkhas standing with big guns at each corner of my school. Instead of questioning these things, I would just unconsciously adapt to them. Instead of being scared of these men with big guns, I made faces at them and waved at them to see if they would wave back. They never did. Though I was used to adapting to any environment and being the new kid, I noticed that I wasn't very successful in acquiring friends. I never had a best friend because I never grew up with anyone, and that seemed to be the quota that had to be met to be a best friend. In the 6th grade, I found out we were leaving Singapore and were moving to Helsinki, Finland. I was very excited. One of the reasons I loved moving was because of the new beginnings that was offered. I knew from experience that I could completely change myself and no one would know who I was or what I was really like before. So I went out shopping and bought all the clothes I thought cool people would wear. It turns out I didn't know whatsoever what normal people in Finland wore because I was used to a school uniform and 90-degree weather, much different than Finland. Through my life, I have attempted to change myself for how I thought would make people like me. And every time it seemed I striked out. I always seemed out of place. I was too competitive and sporty for the theater kids, but I was too weird and sarcastic for the sporty kids. When the time came that we were moving to the US, I decided to change myself once more. Now, finally, I get to Brooks. I came here not confident and not really knowing who I was. But the reason I had such a hard time adjusting to this new life was all of the rules. I was used to a large amount of trust from my parents, and since I had proven to them that I wouldn't do anything bad, I had free range to do pretty much anything. But here, no person of authority knew me, and I had not proven anything to them yet. I hadn't had a bedtime since the age of 9, and I came here only to have random teachers taking my electronics away and turning off the lights telling me I had to sleep. The template that Brooks made for me to live in just didn't fit. I needed my phone because I couldn't sleep without music. I needed longer than 2 hours of study hall because it took me longer to do my homework than the average student. And on nights where I had dish crew, it was either beg for late lights or wake up early the next morning. I was very frustrated with these things, and many times I wanted to yell, "You're not my parents," at the deans. The worst part of this was I felt I was taken away from my best friend, my mom. I called her twice a day, plus more with any other problem I had. I was bitter that the school was keeping me from her, but then she got sick. And looking back on it now, there was no way my mom could have driven me the 45 minutes to school while getting chemotherapy. It is astonishing that she was able to stay my rock all through freshman year while getting cancer treatments, and she is still my rock today. Though I felt that Brooks took me away from her, it also sheltered me from seeing her in pain, and I am thankful to Brooks for that. And even though my mom was sick, she still came to every one of my basketball games. At the time, it was one of my biggest dreams to be a Division I basketball player. Basketball was the one sport that was consistently offered in every country I lived in. Though in Finland, I played on a Finnish team where no one spoke English, I found a way to somewhat understand what the coach was yelling at me all the time, and ultimately I got to play the game, so I made it work. I had picked up and dropped many sports in my life, but basketball had been there from the start. I remember when I first came to Brooks, I told the weightlifting trainer, Stella, I wanted to be able to dunk by senior year. Sadly, I can't, but I have much different goals now, though it would still be really cool if I could dunk. Sorry, Skinner. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do in the spring my freshman year. I thought maybe crew, but I really wanted to do the spring play. Little did I know, Miss Rooney was in no way going to let me do acting instead of crew. So I ended up rowing for the first time that spring. I mean, I wasn't about to say no to Rooney. Sophomore year rolls around, and I still have my heart set on playing basketball in college. So the spring of my sophomore year, I decided to play AAU basketball, but wasn't 100% sure I wanted to give up crew yet. So I did them both. Every weekend, I would race on the water, then my mom would drive me to basketball tournaments where I would play 1 to 2 games. I enjoyed being that busy, but PSA, I would not recommend this, as on a particularly warm day, I passed out halfway through the second basketball game after racing. I loved being occupied so much because early spring, I got the news that Haley had leukemia, and she would be leaving college to start treatment in Mass General. Most weekends after my basketball games, my mom would drive me to the hospital where I would hang out with her. I would still be in my basketball uniform, sitting on the couch next to her bed, and talk until it was time for me to be taken away back to Brooks. These were morbid times, but I got through them because of my dorm mates, Sally, Penelope, and honorary Claire. Once I set foot back on campus, I could put all that in the back of my mind. We would spend the nights laughing obnoxiously loud and making the most ridiculous videos. We were so active and crazy that there was no time to think about what was outside of my little Brooks bubble. That was the key. No time to think. On Wednesday, in the fall of my junior year, my parents drove to school to tell me that after a long fight, my sister had died. They asked me if I wanted to go home with them, and I said no. I opted to stay at school so I didn't have to go home with nothing to do but watch my parents grieve. I had rather sit through all of my classes attempting to conceal my tears instead of going home where there was nothing to do but think. Brooks's template for me once worked. When she died, I didn't know what to do with myself. All the requirements that I once hated gave me something to do. Seated dinner started to make me feel warm rather than annoyed, and I started to understand that it was to build a sense of community, and I really felt it. My free time that I once was convinced I never had became more evident. To cope, I exercised a lot. Some mornings I woke up teary-eyed because I dreamt that she was still alive, and I'd believe it for a few fleeting seconds until reality came flooding in. I couldn't deal with that, so I decided to erg every morning. I don't know how many of you wake up at 5 a.m., but my experience is basically I'm a zombie for the first 15 minutes I'm awake, and that's exactly what I needed. During this time, I was also stressed because I was at a crossroads. The college recruiting process had started, and I figured I couldn't do what I did sophomore year, doing both basketball and crew forever. So I had to choose between a sport I grew up with and a sport I had grown to love in a short amount of time. Throughout the winter, I exhausted myself. I would erg 3 times a day along with basketball practice. I found this wasn't fair to my basketball teammates, but I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I would get all my homework done during my freeze. This would be so I was so exhausted I could immediately crash when getting back to my room. I had no energy to think about all the things that hurt me. Though exercising helped me cope, it wasn't sustainable. I was going through the motions in my daily life. Junior year was very hard for me. I was able to get through it because of the community that surrounded me. Brooks helped me through one of the roughest years of my life. Through all the struggles and all the stress, I came out the other end stronger thanks to my friends and teachers supporting me. Now finally, senior year rolls around. I felt like this year things have finally started to come together. After 3 years, I have found my best friends. I finally feel like I'm being myself, and you know you're comfortable when you have nicknames for your teachers like Tater Tote or Toter Tot, Johnny Hailstorm, and much more, though I would not recommend calling Miss Davies Debbie D. Let's just say she didn't like that when I addressed her in an email. As I look back now, I appreciate all the things I hated about Brooks as an underclassman. So for any freshmen that are feeling the way I did when I first came here, it will get better, I promise. Brooks's template for you is there to set you up for success, and you'll be out of here soon enough. Thank you to Lake Kachikowick for reflecting all the beautiful sunrises during early morning practices, and thank you for being there those cold, dark nights when I just wanted to be alone. Thank you to the fire trail for being there for me to run through when I needed to think things through or reflect. Thank you to Mr. Hale for talking me through 3 years of my life and being there for me whenever I needed you. Thank you to Rooney and Claire for encouraging me to row my freshman year. I don't think I'd be the same without that. Thank you to Mr. Graham for letting me rant on buoy posts every night for homework my junior year. Thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Smith for serving as a host family at times. And Tote, thank you for believing in me and pushing me to the level that I didn't know I could reach. Thank you, Mom, Dad, and Aurora, for unconditionally loving me and supporting me. To all my friends, thank you for just being there, putting up with my craziness and making me laugh. It has done more than you know. Thank you to my roommate, Claire, for being the squared to my C and for being my best friend, even though we haven't known each other since childhood. My time here at Brooks has been littered with disease, death, heartbreak, failure, and self-doubt. But it has also been filled with happiness, love, support, and laughter. So thank you, Brooks, the place I call home.